something occurred to Dwight that nobody expected. Yoakam recently, and this wasn't simply another tour narrative or usual performance update. There was a moment at a huge festival that left fans bewildered, worried and asking serious questions about his health. For someone so recognized for stability and control on stage, this was rare, almost unheard of. But what really sets this narrative apart is not simply what happened in that time. It's what it says about where he is now, personally and professionally. And when you can see the whole picture, that moment begins to look a lot different. The moment that shook the house. What went down at the Railbird Music Festival didn't begin as a problem. It started like any other show on a long and well-planned tour. That weekend, Dwight Yoakam had already done 2 gigs, one in Washington, D.C. and another at a festival in Bristol, crisscrossing from city to city with the kind of consistency that has marked his career for decades. But by the time he took the stage in Lexington, the stage itself was becoming into a matter not to be disregarded. The heat was scorching, the humidity oppressive, and the physical toll of back-to-back performances had quietly mounted. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary to the crowd. The set began as planned, solid delivery, presence controlled. But early in the performance, something changed that could not be worked through or concealed. Without warning, Yoakam moved away from the stage, interrupting the flow of the show. At that point, no instant explanation was forthcoming, only a rising wave of confusion rippling through the assembled crowd. It was later explained that he had begun to feel the effects of overheating and dehydration, which may accelerate rapidly in intense outdoor situations. The situation seemed doable at first, despite the sudden stop. He was back in about 10 minutes, and continued the act with the same professionalism fans had grown to expect. The reappearance pacified the throng, brought back a sense of normalcy and indicated that whatever had transpired was temporary and under control. The show continued for some time as scheduled. But such steadiness was not to last. After playing only 2 more songs, Yoakam was compelled to quit again, and this time the choice was final. The second exit had a different weight from the first. This was not a prudent stop. It was a sure indication that it was impossible to go on physically any longer. The atmosphere in the audience changed immediately. Applause became doubt, entertainment became concern as spectators started to digest what they were seeing in real time. Before leaving, Yoakam spoke directly to the audience, delivering a level of honesty rarely seen in moments like this. This was only the second occasion in nearly 4 decades of performance that he had to step off stage during the show, he said. He also acknowledged that he felt like he would pass out, a statement that highlighted the seriousness of the issue without hyperbole. That was worth more than any official declaration, coming from a man famed for discipline and poise. It wasn't a technical issue, or a bad schedule. It was that his body had finally maxed out, and it wasn't something that could be ignored anymore. But the reaction was not frustration from the crowd, but a wave of concern that went beyond that one event. Fans were not merely responding to a truncated show. They were reacting to the unusual sight of an endurance artist being forced to give up. And in that moment, the conversation turned from the show itself to a far wider subject of health, longevity, and the demands of a career that has never stopped. What went on behind the scenes? The hours following the abrupt termination of the concert saw the scenario move from speculation to clarification. Dwight Yoakam didn't disappear or allow the rumors to spiral out of control. Instead, a statement was issued describing the specific nature of the incident. That update said the occurrence was the result of a brief case of heat exhaustion triggered by the strong mix of high temperatures and humidity at the outdoor concert. The answer sounded easy, but the context made the issue more compelling. Yoakam had already been on the road between a number of locations in a short period of time, and the physical toll of it all, even for someone with decades of expertise, had plainly taken its toll under those conditions. The most remarkable thing in the aftermath was how swiftly the reaction team responded. Festival staff and emergency medical personnel were right there, making sure Yoakam got treated immediately. There was no uncertainty backstage. It was dealt with quickly and efficiently, which may have avoided the situation from worse. The statement added stressed he was totally all right, a phrase repeated to reassure followers who had seen the brief stoppage. But despite that comfort, the tone of the message reflected how close the issue had come to becoming more serious. Heat fatigue is a common occurrence at outdoor events, but when it hits a musician mid-set to the extent of stopping a show, it shows a level of physical stress that can't be ignored. The aftermath was a rapid response from the fans, many of whom were at the event. They weren't disappointed to get a shortened set, but concerned for his well-being. There were several messages of relief that he was safe and reminders for him to take care of himself. This change in the fans' reaction reflected a more profound aspect of his feelings for his audience. Instead of impatience, there was patience and understanding, the result of years of trust developed through regular performances and authenticity. But while the official letter wrapped up the immediate chapter of the incident, it started a wider discourse, one that went beyond any single explanation and began to consider what this moment might imply in the bigger scope of his career. A career based on stamina and pressure. To grasp the significance of that moment at the festival, you had to see the pattern that characterized Dwight Yoakam long before this occurrence occurred. His career was never founded on shortcuts or instant industry backing. Resistance, tenacity, an unconventional way that made him prove himself in situations that didn't embrace him at first shaped it. Nashville rejected him early on because his honky-tonk and bluegrass-driven sound did not mesh with the polished country pop approach that dominated the scene at the time. Instead of taking the expected path, he went to Los Angeles and played in clubs with cowpunk and alternative country bands, steadily creating a following outside the regular system. That decision determined all that followed, because it meant his success would depend almost exclusively on consistency and persistent performance, rather than industry protection. His breakthrough with guitars, Cadillacs, etc., came after years of live events and personal involvement. The foundation had already been created. The album succeeded well. Not only did it hit #1 on the country albums list, Honky Tonk Man went to #3 and also became the first country music video to be seen on MTV. But it was not at one moment of exposure that those milestones were achieved. They were part of a system he had constructed for himself that demanded ongoing output in touring and visibility. The same pattern held into the late 80s and early 90s with albums like Hillbilly Deluxe and Buenas Noches from a Lonely Room, delivering multiple top 10 successes and broadening his appeal without ever giving up the traditional sound he'd been told wouldn't fly. But such a professional structure comes with a cost that isn't always evident. Being relevant without losing identity takes constant work, and for Yoakam, it meant being active over the decades in both music and acting. He didn't just depend on chart success. He branched out into cinematic work, such as his appearance in Sling Blade, which gained him distinction at the Screen Actors Guild Awards level, and later appearances in productions like Panic Room and Goliath. Each of these milestones increased rather than decreased his workload, and hence his career never really slowed down. From that angle, the current event on stage doesn't seem isolated. It is indicative of the physical difficulties of a career that has been sustained for decades without major pauses, where endurance itself has become part of the expectation. Creative control, risks and repercussions. Well before his recent brush with bad health, Dwight Yoakam had already shown himself ready to take risks that many musicians in his position would shy away from. One of the clearest examples came when he got behind the camera to write, direct and star in the Western picture South of Heaven, West of Hell. This wasn't a side project. To take his identity beyond music and into total creative control was a bold move. But it happened quite differently from what he had expected. The picture did poorly at the box office, not opening new doors but creating instant pressure. The unpaid work and financial losses prompted Yoakam into hard decisions that would resonate across his career. Crew members filed claims. The biggest news of that time was the dissolution of his long-term collaboration with Pete Anderson, the guitarist and producer who had been a cornerstone of his style since the beginning. Their partnership had helped to shape everything from his breakthrough recordings to his hallmark style, especially the twangy electric guitar work that defined his take on the Bakersfield sound. But following the financial hardship of the movie, Yoakam decided to dismiss Anderson from his touring band, terminating a partnership that had lasted years. But it was more than a professional move, it was a fundamental transformation in his approach to music, forcing him to reconstruct portions of his creative process, while preserving the expectations of his audience. Meanwhile, Yoakam continued to push his music into areas that were not necessarily sure things commercially. Albums such as Gone dabbled in rhythm and blues, Tejano, and even psychedelic influences but did not gain much radio airplay despite critical acclaim. This was a recurring theme in his career, preferring creative direction over industry trends, even if it meant less airplay or fewer crowds in certain areas. But he never went back to chase popularity, but instead doubled down on the identity he had created. That same approach carried over to following legal battles, including his fight with his record label over streaming rights decades later. Rather than just removing his music from digital platforms, he appealed the decision and asserted ownership of his repertoire. Eventually, this conflict was addressed, but it was a recurring theme in his career. Control always had consequences. This history, given the recent onstage incident, adds another depth to the story of an artist who has faced physical restrictions, but also one who has spent a career weighed down by his own choices. Where he is today. And where he's headed. What makes the latest event with Dwight Yoakam more than just a one-off performance is how it coincides with where he is now in his personal life and creative path. Now, unlike earlier in his career, when non-stop touring and steady output fueled his momentum, Yoakam's existence involves duties that weren't there before. He married and had children later than other artists of his time, with his first child arriving in his 60s. It's an inevitable shift that changes priorities, even when the public image stays centered on music. That contrast between an intense performing schedule and a more grounded domestic life simmers with a tension that is not always visible, but becomes apparent in situations like the one at Railbird. At the same time, his artistic sensibilities have not dulled or become predictable. His choice to make a bluegrass version of Purple Rain as part of Swimming Pools, Movie Stars is consistent with the pattern that's been with him from the start, respecting history but making it his own. That recording was directly inspired by the death of Prince, something he said was quite moving, not just because of the loss, but the song's emotional content. That readiness to respond to genuine events with music indicates that his creative process is still firmly connected to lived experience and not commercial planning. Putting these together, the physical demands of traveling, the duties of family life, and the ongoing need to create, they paint a clearer picture of what the current occurrence really represents. It is not a sudden collapse or evidence of instability, but rather a point at when many pressures converged within a short time under intense conditions. Yoakam himself stressed that he was okay after the incident, and thanked fans, workers and medical professionals for their assistance, which further implies that the matter was well managed rather than disregarded. But such moments have a way of lingering, for they present a simple but inescapable issue. How long can someone sustain this amount of activity without changing the balance? For an artist who made his name on persistence and independence, the answer may not come with a public announcement or dramatic change. Instead, it may manifest itself slowly in the way he arranges performances, the way he prioritizes projects, and the way he decides to protect both his health and the profession he has spent decades creating. So, after everything that happened, one question remains simple. If Dwight go on as Yoakam has always gone, or slow down?